Welcome in, friends. It's time again, the Cannabiz Conversations podcast, telling the stories of founders everywhere. And I love it because today is a special event because it's our first duo here of the season. And what's exciting about duos is that we get to hear different stories from different perspectives all around the same beautiful plant, which I know makes my day, as I'm sure it makes many of yours. Speaking of making my day, thank you so much to our team at Hephaestus, House of Automation, for all that you do for the show as a sponsor. And folks, if you're looking to produce 2,000 joints an hour and you'd like it to have the Dutch Crown finish with infused material, which it sounds like something hurts my hands even thinking about, you got to head over to Hephaestus-tech.com. That's Hephaestus, tech.com to find out more. They're the best. And once again, we really couldn't do it without them. All right. So today is fun. We have Jocelyn and Claudio, the co-founders of Budist. Jocelyn, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Sean, I'm loving your energy. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a thing. I wake up this way, Jocelyn. I get out of bed this way. I don't use any caffeine. And frankly, I just smoked before I came out here. So the fact of the matter is I do that to sort of try to bring it down because I think it's almost too intense for my own self some days. So thank you. I appreciate it. Claudio, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, here's how it goes. For anyone who hasn't watched the show, because we tell the story of founders, it's important to first find out where they became, I would say, involved with this plant. Claudio, to my right on the screen as it sits today, hit me up with your thoughts, man. Where did it all begin for you in this beautiful plant?
Well, it began for me very early on. Like some folks, I got turned on to cannabis as an early teen, 13 years old. I had an older brother, a couple years older. So he was getting high at an early age. And as the younger brother, as it were, I got turned on to, the plant through his influence. I was kind of born and raised in Hollywood and in the Los Angeles area, where I think it's worth mentioning, like culturally, that was really like the epicenter. And I was a teenager of the 80s. And, for those familiar with that kind of time and place, it was the age of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I was really into heavy metal and fast living. And it wasn't just me. I wasn't kind of some like early bloomer, really like everybody that I kind of grew up with in the 80s. We were all just living fast. And so, started smoking at 13. By the time I was 14, I was already kind of as in the trade, as it were, and really got kind of active in the trade, 14, 15 years old, had some run-ins with the law around that time. And then, around 1985, it's funny because that's when, Reagan kind of was in office and Nancy Reagan kind of came out with her Just Say No to Drugs campaign. And so I was a part of all that. I went through kind of Scared Straight and all those programs. Yeah. And, fast forward to around 1987, I love the Grateful Dead references that you're displaying there. I got turned on to the Grateful Dead in 87, and that really changed my life. Prior to that, as I mentioned, I was kind of a Hessian heavy metaler, but I was Grateful Dead once. Yeah.
I was going to say, man, I want to pause you there for a second because you're already touching on a lot of stuff on the show. So we call it the 13 Club. So we've got quite a few guests that have been on the show, founders in the industry, part of the 13 Club. So that's always cool. I'm always jealous as a kid who grew up in the Midwest, hearing the stories of California people who grew up in this sort of, I don't want to say acceptable, but much more acceptable than it was for us, here. I grew up outside of Chicago, so it wasn't crazy foreign, but still not in the way that the Californians make it out to be. If I had $1 for every time someone made a Dare reference on this show, I wouldn't even have to do this show, I don't think. This show, I love it because what a disaster, right? Just from the onset. I tell people all the time, and I'm going to get a buddy of mine to make a shirt. Dare made me want to do drugs because when someone says to me, no, shouldn't be done, can't be done, won't be good for you, I think, now who is someone to say that about me, right? How is someone going to prejudge this for me? So yeah, man, I absolutely love the reference. So my biggest question, though, the biggest note I circled here was metal to dead. Tell me, how does one, because look, I did it because my brother raised me as a Metallica head, the Megadeths. My first show was Metallica, for Christ's sakes, after a Green Day concert. So yeah, no, my brother was the same reference point. But how did you make the switch?
Yeah, it's a funny question because for me, I hate to say this about myself, but it was almost like the poser extraordinaire. Like one day I'm marching down the high school halls wearing, all black, steel-toed boots, Satan. I love Slayer, Iron Maiden, and to this day I do as well. By the way, I love.
Sure, no, I didn't think you abandoned it. That's not what I'm talking about. I simply wonder where the stretch happened.
But I did, though. It was literally like one day I went to go see the Grateful Dead. My girlfriend's mom took me to go see a show. She was a Deadhead since the 60s. And I came home that day and it was literally like 24-hour transformation. I went from steel-toed boots and pentagrams to skirts and freaking Birkenstocks within a 24-hour window. And I remember going back to school the next day and people were like, wait a minute, is that you? Like, what happened? But that's how transformational the band is for people who wonder. Like, why are there all these Deadheads and why are they so fanatical? It truly was transformational for me. And I think a key part of that was, just bringing it back to the plant, is that it's just, cannabis was central to that culture, I think, as most people know. And it was just the lifestyle, the ethos, it was vegetarianism, it was cannabis, it was spirituality, and I think just something intrinsic in me wanted to live that lifestyle, and that lifestyle resonated with me. Whereas, as we know, with heavy metal, it was about, fast cars and narcotics and fast living, and it was, dark and it was gritty, and not that all that's not a good thing as well, but it's just, for me personally, my ethos was a little bit more aligned with the light and the magic and the plan than anything else. And so I glommed onto it instantly and proceeded to thereafter, see the Grateful Dead over, about a couple hundred, shows from 87 through like 92. I saw them all the way to 95, but around 92, I dropped out to go to college. So I started to slow down by that time.
Silly college gets in the way. I have to ask because we have Jocelyn here. Jocelyn, as this being a co-founder, is any of this news to you? Have you heard this all before?
Many of times. One of the really beautiful things that, because Claudio and I are both life partners and business partners in building Budist, and we share a lot of mutual loves and passions outside of just cannabis. Music is one of those biggest passions for me as well. I grew up in Orange County. I was born in December 1984. So for me, and music has been the biggest part of my life, like stemming back from my childhood. I grew up in a family of musicians. I've got a blended family where I grew up with 5 brothers. So a big, crazy household. But then growing up in the 90s, really, and especially being in Orange County, here comes Sublime, here comes No Doubt, here comes all these other bands that cannabis was really a core part of. Yeah. And so growing up specifically at that time for me, being born in Long Beach, which is so much like cannabis culture comes from Long Beach, from different music, whether Sublime or Snoop, the list goes on and on. But it was just really instrumental to my childhood. Cannabis has been a part of my childhood. I grew up around the plant. Like Claudio, I first tried, and I wasn't part of the 13 club. I'm part of the 15 club.
Yeah, all right. Part of the 15 club.
Growing up with 5 brothers. It was part of it,
Yeah, I was gonna say we probably shouldn't be celebrating any of these ages, right? But I at the end of the day, I realize that as a part of our culture, as a part of what we do here, as people who are connected to this planet in any sort of way. You have a story with it. It has impacted you. And see, again, growing up in Orange County, right? Now, I have to ask you, because I'm always intrigued by women getting involved. Because the culture of men and drugs, it just seems more top of mind, right? But I always ask my wife, and I kind of know because, as Claudio referenced, getting into the business, I consider myself a legacy distributor from back in the day. And so that's how I met my wife, was through that and through other people. And so I kind of found out her story. But as a female, talk to me about like what it's like to have to, you're in Orange County, you're a female, young female. How do you get into the plant? What is that like to you? Is it introduced from other girlfriends? Is it a male influence? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was my brothers. You know, I grew up with 5 boys, and all of them consumed cannabis as well. And so I just vividly remember my first time consuming. It was at a party that we were having at my parents' house where they were out of town. And we're all sitting around the dining room table and just kind of puffing from an apple. And it just, you know, it didn't take with me at that time. It was just, I've always been a very free-spirited, very open-minded individual. And so, you know, trying things along the way, but it really wasn't until, you know, I moved up to San Francisco in my mid 20s that I really started seeking more just internal exploration. And it just took on a whole level of passion for me at that point. But in large part, you know, just getting into cannabis for me, it was a connection of just a familiarity, growing up around it. You know, it wasn't a stranger to my parents either. It was just something very normal kind of in my household growing up with. And it was never really looked upon as like a terrible thing, but also just like anything, my parents always instilled in us, do things consciously, be aware of the things that you're consuming, be free-spirited, go out and explore the world, but just do it in a way that's responsible. And, you know, those lessons have served me really well in my life.
That sounds very similar. Again, it sounds like the California way that my parents were saying to me, that they would give me autonomy until I deserved to have it taken away from me.
Yeah.
And basically was live and make those decisions, be responsible. No, you know, my dad used to always say, look, you can show up on a lot of things in the newspaper. The police blotter isn't one of them. You know, that isn't going to go well for any of us, me, you, or otherwise. And so it was top of mind, but in the same turn, I knew getting involved with this plant in the Midwest as a young kid was gonna, you know, offer those problems and opportunities to do that. Claudio, you mentioned run-ins with police during the origin story. Was it due to the plant, or was it due to just the other side of sort of, you know, you as an individual?
Oh, it was definitely due to the plant and more broadly just drug culture, you know, as teenagers. And as I mentioned, during that Reagan era with Just Say No and all those campaigns. I mean, it was very aggressive. I mean, I've been witness to many raids and had to deal with a lot of, you know, law enforcement from DEA all the way down to kind of local enforcement. You know, with me personally, you know, I'm Hispanic. I come from, you know, my family's from Chile. And so it's like I had kind of the duo there of being Hispanic and a hippie. And so, you know, for folks that have dealt with kind of a disproportionate kind of discrimination against from law enforcement against yourself, you know, I gave cops a lot of reason, you know, to want to pick a fight with me. And so I definitely had my run-in with the law, you know, several times when I was a teenager. And then on Grateful Dead tour, you know, the DEA was very active on Grateful Dead tour. And, you know, my group that I toured around with, you know, we ended up being part of, you know, a sting operation with organized crime, and it got really ugly. And so I hate to admit that I've seen some dark sides of it.
Wow, dude, that's wild. Again, this is why we tell these stories. You know, we get to hear them. I get to hear them all the time, and hearing from folks who have, you know, just this season alone, we've had folks talk to me about Angela Pye talking to me about getting pot in Hong Kong, and I'm thinking, how the did that happen? And she's basically like, look, don't ask, you know. We've got people talking about it from Israel. I mean, so growing up and listening to these stories and hearing, you know, these parts of the culture, and from your perspective, Claudio, it's interesting that you talk about that sort of, I don't mean like double whammy, right? That double opportunity for police to see the hippie plus the Hispanic, and it makes it more unfortunate for me to see sort of the ugly side of the policing culture when it comes to the plant. I mean, you know, I've always had a problem with it. I've always been in issue with it. I've never been in law enforcement's issue with it, like where I've been behind anyone on that as far as, you know, in trouble for it. But I have definitely fought for it front and center. And it's not an easy fight. And that's why Jocelyn, that's why I was so interested in your story of kind of building up the fight, because, you know, again, as a female and, you know, Southern California, this sort of vibe of like, we're talking about Claudio, not like a double whammy, but like a female who's into drugs seems like you would just get put into a really narrow box really quickly. Did you experience any of that growing up?
No, because I wasn't super open about it. And I think just kind of how I present, people wouldn't have really assumed that. I think for me, in large part, my interest in cannabis and the reason I started, one, initially trying it young, but two, more so getting into it when I was in college and then thereafter, it was really about self-exploration. I've been always someone who's very curious about myself, why I think the way that I do. And it just really has helped me like instrumentally in my life and getting to know who I am better and also just calming down my brain. I have a very overactive brain. The older I get, the more I wonder if I have ADHD. And I think that I probably do. And I think I've probably in large part been consuming to really just manage my brain and just create some calm. And so it's just, it's been something that I've just felt necessary to my spiritual well-being.
Yeah, I mean, look, I made the joke when we started, right? Like it's the same reason I've always used it was to find a way, because my parents were told I had ADHD, and at the time, I'm only a couple years older than you are, and so it's the same era. It's all the same thing. It's all the same parenting model, right? And so my parents were like, "Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. He doesn't need that." And they started to get to a point where they were like, "Does he?" And then I found the plant when I was like 14, and then all of a sudden they didn't know it, but my behavior changed, and they just assumed, they kind of wrote it off to puberty, and it all kind of worked out timing wise for me to be able to go, sweet, you guys are on the puberty train. I'm on this train. This is good. These are parallel tracks. You talked about your 20s moving to San Francisco and things sort of changing for you. In what way?
Well, okay. So I was born in Long Beach, spent the first 8 years of my life there. And then my family moved to Irvine, which, Irvine is one of the first master planned communities in the country. Everything runs on a grid. It's really structured. A lot of the houses look the same. It's all chain restaurants. So I just grew up in what felt rather sheltered for my childhood. But yet I'd always been this really free-spirited person who I've just had a strong curiosity in the world and all the things that I enjoy. And so, when I graduated college, it was 2007. The iPhone had come out that summer. And then fast forward a year later, I find myself working on the agency side, working with all these app developers as, apps are being born and our just whole world, really started to change in 2008, 2009, just with, the advent of mobile. So that brought me up to San Francisco when I was in my mid-20s. And for me personally, and where I was at that time, it was almost like I often describe it as going from black and white to color. My whole world just really opened up as I was in a place that was just filled with so much enthusiasm because, obviously just the whole tech scene in San Francisco really started to go through its own, the second kind of phase. And then here I was just meeting so many different kinds of people. It was so much more diversity than I had grown up around. My whole world opened up. And then further at that point, cannabis was there was this faction of people in tech that were really experimental. And at that time, then I started to use cannabis again, just to start to rediscover myself growing into an adult. And it just was a part of that connection for me and just kind of opening up my world to who I am and just the world around me. So it was just a really amazing period of my life that truly kind of shifted how I look at the world.
I love that. I love when the plant can make that because it's something that I've been struggling to sort of be able to vocalize in myself and what has happened to myself over the years and sort of that opening up. And I think it's the same way, Claudio, you talk about the transformational piece of the Grateful Dead and sort of those two pieces of the puzzle coming together and you being able to see more of the light than the dark. I assume your San Francisco moment was that dead, or was there another moment beyond that maybe kind of changed it for you where, and I love that. I mean, who doesn't love the idea of going from black and white to color, right? It's got some great Wizard of Oz imagery in my mind here. I love it. So Claudio, is that your black and white moment to color when it relates to the plant? Was that dead ascension?
Yeah, definitely. That was a part of it for sure. I mean, I felt that just, again, living in LA and being around the culture that is the music and kind of rock culture that I was born that I was born into, was very colorful, even when it wasn't Grateful Dead. But sure, with what the Grateful Dead did for me is then it got me out of Southern California. Like Jocelyn, I actually was born and raised in LA, but then my family did move to Orange County as well. And so I did start to get a little bit more of that homogenized kind of community in Orange. And then when I jumped on Grateful Dead tour, I was going across the country, seeing them in 30 states, nationwide. And now going and seeing all that diversity, going to New York for the first time, going to Philly, going to Boston, going to all the Midwest states, that definitely added a lot of texture and color to my perspective on life. And interestingly, one of the shows that's most memorable is I went and saw them at the Greek Theater in Berkeley in the late 80s. And I thought to myself as a teenager, like, I would love to live here one day and go to school here. And then fast forward a few years, I ended up getting into UC Berkeley for university. And so that was kind of a little bit of a short, like, full circle moment for me, where I was able to finally kind of be on that campus. And when I went to Berkeley, like Jocelyn, I felt like it was just a very different culture and community up here in the Bay Area. And that's where we live now, by the way. So I went to Berkeley in 1994. And I moved to Oakland just a few years later, and I'm still in the same residence that I moved to. That's where I'm at right now. So I've been here, since the 90s, posting up in Oakland. I've started kind of numerous cannabis companies here and kind of learned to cultivate here in the area. But around that time was really special because it wasn't just, just the whole hippie culture and everything that was going on. It was like the birth of Burning Man and that whole community. Rave culture was really popping. And most importantly for this conversation, it was the birth of, medical cannabis and the whole movement that got birthed here in San Francisco and in the Bay Area in the early stages of Prop 215. And I really at that time learned to cultivate. That's when indoor growing really took off. And I remember going to kind of the indoor garden centers here in Berkeley and learning to get all the tricks and techniques and the equipment and everything to kind of start to grow indoors. I did a lot of that. That's how I paid my way through school. So it was definitely another turning point or inflection point for me, and taught me a lot about this culture.
Yeah, I mean, look, early school manifestation right there. Wanting to go, liking the idea of UC Berkeley, then ended up there. I have a friend who him and his wife live there. They live in that area. She has a custard shop in downtown Berkeley that she runs, that she loves, and they're from the Midwest here, and they've been there forever. They love it out there. So, and again, I watched a lot of my friends go that way. I didn't make it that far. I got stuck in Colorado, and I never made it any further for me. And I ended up actually coming back to the Midwest. So quickly, while we wrap up the first half of the show, Claudio, for you, Grateful Dead show, you Alpine Valley?
I've been to Alpine Valley, yes.
Okay, it's like 30 minutes from my house.
Okay.
That's where I live in Wisconsin, in the middle of Prohibition, but we do have some cool music venues that we get to check out every
I've also seen a lot of fish there too. So I've been there a few times.
Yeah, I'm not a fish guy, but yes, my buddies all tell me those are as fun of shows as you will find. So that's great.
Yes.
Awesome. Jocelyn, I want to ask you on the way out. So you're using cannabis, as you say, for I don't want to say mind expansion, but better term. I'm sure there's one, but you're opening up your mind. When if anything, or do you make a jump when you start to have that be a mindset? Because this is a personal question, because I know I did. When you have that mindset, did you make the jump to trying other things outside of cannabis? And this is not a dare gateway question, for God's sakes. This is just simply an understanding of the mindset. Did that happen for you during this transition to San Francisco? Yes,
but what I paired it with was life and leaning into the things that I want to be doing. So for me, cannabis, I'm a daily flower consumer, and it's very much it's ritualistic for me, and it's often tied to certain activities. So when, in particular, when I started really diving deep into cannabis, it was in my transition of leaving a 10-year career in tech to join the cannabis industry in 2018. And I took 4 months off, which was the first time I'd really taken any time off. I was always a very young, ambitious person in my career. I've worked really, really hard throughout my entire professional career and just being. And I took this 4-month period off before coming into the cannabis industry. And because I knew I was going to be coming into the cannabis industry, I really started to take time to just really be much more thoughtful about my own consumption. And so what I paired cannabis with were things that I like to do, and then diving deep into that. So, I learned to play the guitar during this 4-month period that then became one of the most passionate, biggest parts of my life. I learned to play the guitar, the drums. I was in a weekly voice lesson during this 4-month period off. I was taking a 6-week pottery course. I was doing a 6-week course at San Francisco Cooking School. I was learning to sail a 28-foot keelboat on the San Francisco Bay. I was backpacking through Yosemite on my own. I just did all sorts of things to go find myself. And cannabis was really a part of all of those activities, especially music. It's just, for me, I am also I'm a very free-spirited person. I'm also a very pragmatic, rigid. I'm very thoughtful about the things I do. So that also can tend to lead to a lot of overthinking. And so for me, before playing any music, it's really just a ritualistic thing for me to light up a joint first and just to let myself relax, get into that, state of mind that's going to allow myself to be the freest possible version. So I'm not overthinking as I'm playing. Or with writing work, I love to write as well. So it's just any creative activity. I find it just entirely opens up my mind, which is where just the greatest art is produced,
It's so true. And music is just this constant vein that I hear from you, right? From the onset, from where it begins. And I think it's a great combination of the two. And I know it's what helped me really kind of become more of myself when, I all of a sudden kind of showed up to my senior year of high school, a hippie with long hair and, big, huge hemp dog collars and the whole 9 yards and dead shirts every day. And so it's something that I think helped me sort of feel accepted, I'm any kid, maybe I grew up with a little bit of trauma that I'm trying to find a way to not deal with. And this is the easiest way to sort of deal with that. But as I've gotten older, I've seen cannabis be able to be transformative when dealing with all of that shit. So, and I don't begrudge myself that approach in my, my late teens, early 20s versus my approach in my 40s. That wouldn't be fair to myself. So I think looking at it, from that perspective is really great. And for you to I make the joke that the last time I took 4 months off of cannabis was the 4 months before I found it. So the idea that you took 4 months off and were able to just sort of do this thing and be in a different place, I respect it. I really do. And it's something that I'm noticing, Claudio, this maybe sounds more like an old head thing to say, but I'm getting this newer age culture thing of taking THC breaks. And I'm like, I don't really get this. This seems, new age for me, but I've done it and I find myself not terribly hating it. Have you experienced this, Claudio, from your perspective as an old head?
For sure. I don't consume nearly as much as the community I hang out with these days. And for me, it's I have the opposite effect that Jocelyn does. For me, cannabis is not functional. For me, it's what I do at the end of my night. It's not social for me, nor is it functional. And I don't have as much of those experiences with the indicas or sativas and differences there. Just generally speaking, when I consume, I tend to be a little bit more introspective. It tends to relax me. It turns my mind off more than on. And so I tend to just consume, we're just, running Budist, which we're excited to talk to you about in the next episode. It's a 24/7 thing for us. We're working around the clock. And for me to be kind of performing at my best in that regard, I have to do that very clear-headed. And so cannabis, again, comes usually at the end of the night, oftentimes only on the weekends. And I do very moderate consumption.
I love that. I love to hear that because, again, in business relationships, my wife and I are pretty much daily consumers of flower, but our business partner is the nighttime guy. He is not functional. He will not have or do or be a part of. So he always kind of knows when we're vibing because we'll both call him on a speakerphone. He'll be like, guys, really? I'm like, yeah, dude, this is what I'm in a place to talk to you now. I'm usually super annoyed by you, right? So now I get to not be as much. No, I'm just kidding. He's also our editor, producer, so everything's fine. But yeah, no, it's one of those things that I look at. Look, you two have been wonderful in the first half here. We've already covered your origin stories. On the second half, though, I want to get into the origin story of the Budist because I think what you're doing takes tremendous guts. I think it takes planning, but I'm starting to sense where the history from this app comes from, and that this isn't some like, hey, we woke up one day and wanted to have an app. We really don't know what we're talking about. That isn't this. And I'm really excited to learn more about what it is. So we're going to talk about that on the second half. Folks, the second half will be here next Wednesday, so you don't have to wait long. It's going to be fine. Go back, watch this episode. If you've missed any of the previous episodes of the season, you should go watch those too, because again, our friends at Hephaestus, House of Automation, are this year's sponsors. If you don't know, you should know. The Aura X is their product. It delivers precision packed hand rolls, perfect each time, and up to 2,000 an hour. People can't do that work. Only machines can. So if you're looking for a pre-roll system that works for you, head over to HEFESTUS-tech.com to learn more. Thank you to them. Thank you, Jocelyn and Claudio, for part one. We appreciate you and your origin stories, and we look forward to hearing all about the Budist on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.